The United States is well behind a lot of other developed countries in terms of encouraging or bringing in private investment dollars into renovating and improving U.S. infrastructure. And I think there's three reasons for that that can be addressed. One is education and understanding on the part of those public sector infrastructure owners. The other is managing the risks that come up, special risks that come up when you're partnering with the private sector to operate and manage and develop civil infrastructure projects. The third is public policy. So I think that we could divide the answer into those three areas. In terms of education, I think there's a big need for educational institutions such as Cornell and others to do executive education, but focused only on public sector infrastructure owners about how to structure contracts between the public sector project sponsor, who they are, and the private partner who would come in to work with them to improve infrastructure. That could be operation, maintenance, it could be design and construction, it could be financing. Second, I think there's a big role for academic institutions in producing data and research on how these arrangements where the private sector comes in to help improve U.S. infrastructure, how they can be structured better, what are those effects, et cetera. The third piece of the educational aspect of this, I think, is educating people about who the actual investors in civil and social infrastructure are. I think there's misconceptions that a lot of these are rapacious Wall Street investors who are just looking for quick, short-term returns on investing in infrastructure, and that is, in the vast majority of cases, absolutely not true. It is large public sector pension funds, private sector pension funds, university endowments. So these are institutional investors that have long-term liabilities. So if you're a pension fund, say for retired police, fire, teachers, and so forth, you have these liabilities that you have to meet many years out. And infrastructure, whether it's a seaport, an airport, a water system, a toll road, they can provide these long-term, pretty stable cash flows to meet those long-dated liabilities. So there's a nice match between the investment needs of patient, rational, careful institutional investors and the cash flows provided by infrastructure. So U.S. infrastructure would benefit a lot. So building trades union, for example, could actually be investing in projects that their workers are actually working on. So it's a win-win situation. I think there's a lot of misconceptions about those benefits. So that's the third piece of the education. The second piece is risk management. So I think there's a lot of risks that are that come up when you partner with the private sector. One of those is the risk that you lock into a long-term contract. So some of these P3 contracts, depending on the nature of it, could last 15, 20, 25, even 30 years. In some cases longer. So there's a fear on the part of the public sector that you're locking in a set way of doing things with this private sector partner. One of the risks that is generated by that is the risk that the private partner will not adopt new technology. So you need to have creative contracting arrangements. This is called future proofing or future enabling, where the contract enables or encourages the private partner to adopt new technologies. In other words, the risk of not adopting the new technology falls on the private partner. So the public sector needs to be educated about these sorts of things. Other types of risks associated, headline risk, the fear that the private partner is going to do something that makes the public sector look bad. These risks need to be managed through the contract. The third element of this is public policy. And public policy in the United States has historically discouraged private investment, kind of surprisingly to many people who think of the U.S. economy as sort of a free market economy. Now, in infrastructure delivery, for many years, for decades now, the default way of financing, not funding, but financing infrastructure projects has been tax-exempt municipal bonds. So that means that the interest income to the bondholder, paid to the bondholder, is exempt at the federal level. They don't pay federal level on the interest income tax. What that does, just because of the tax code, I'm unaware of any other country that has that tax provision, creates an unlevel cost of capital playing field between debt that's issued just by a government and is thus subject to the tax exemption, and privately issued debt that you would get with a private partner that does not have that tax exemption. And that has tended to create a bit of a strange situation in terms of the cost of money or the cost of capital, which is super important for a big, expensive, long-term infrastructure project. If you're the public sector owner, you'd say, well, my costs of financing are much less if I use tax-exempt municipal bonds. Now, this problem with infrastructure finance has been recognized for a long time, and there have been some policy steps to try to correct it at the federal level. The main one is the creation of something called private activity bonds, or PABs, and private activity bonds extend that tax exemption to valid privately issued debt. By that I mean debt that's actually used for a public infrastructure project. The Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, passed in November of 2021, had a provision in the act that would raise the cap. So the Treasury's was capped before was $15 billion. That cap was hit prior to the act. The act doubled that cap to $30 billion, but I think there's other policy changes that could be undertaken that would encourage more private investment. Reform of environmental permitting might help with that. There's maybe increasing that cap on private activity bonds even further. So there's a number of things that could be done, I think, on the policy side of this, in addition to the risk management and the educational elements of encouraging private investment in U.S. infrastructure.